Mick, thank you very much for joining me and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting to sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, this conversation just came out of the blue, and so I've not had an awful lot of time to do prep for it. But so I think I'm going to learn quite a lot during this conversation. So let's get to it. Now, talking of let's get, leger, we've just had the World Cup. Literally, I've just got back and dried out. You were racing this weekend and sadly didn't qualify for the race. But it was a bit of a crazy race, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing. We just finished watching it on TV because I didn't feel like being out in the weather.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And it was kind of like, I was bummed not to get in the final. I had a fall in my qualifying run. I mean, realistically, I'm not going to get in the top 30 anyway, so it would have been nice to get into the top 60 and get into the semi, but watching the race today in those conditions, it's kind of like the most memorable experiences of my career have always been on those days.
Yeah.
Whether they go well or not, it's just a lot of fun on the bike.
Yeah. And is that how you see it? A lot of fun, or is there an element of this is pretty dangerous?
It's been pretty rare that I've thought this is too dangerous.
Yeah.
Usually it's at a street race in South America or somewhere like that.
Sure, yeah.
But in those muddy conditions, things slow down quite a lot. And
yeah.
This course, especially in the dry, is just so fast. And it's like you can hold your line a little bit more confidently maybe, but if something goes wrong at that speed, then the consequences are quite a bit higher.
When you're so used to racing enduro tracks, and then when you come to a World Cup track, do you have to retune your brain to deal with the higher speeds?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot different. And I would say that it's more the intensity. The speed, you kind of pick it up again after a couple of practice runs. But the hardest thing is in enduro, you don't know the course that well. Yeah. Like you get one run on each track, and it's like in the e-bikes, it's 10, 11, 12 stages.
Sure.
So you just never, if you ride at the intensity that you would on a World Cup track, then you just blow off the first turn. So,
do you therefore take a more in-depth sort of approach to the track walk? Are you really over-analysing it because you think I need to learn this track, or are you a bit more laid back because you're used to riding without even seeing the track?
Yeah, I'm a bit more in depth, I would say.
Okay. Maybe
just like average. There's guys that pick it apart a lot more than I do, and there's guys that take it a lot like more relaxed than I do as well. So at a World Cup, it's basically you do the first track walk and get an idea of where the track goes, and you kind of, especially after having raced for so long, you can kind of predict the way things are going to develop, and lines that aren't obvious in track walk, you know from experience that things are going to cut in or blow out or whatever. But then first practice day, the track develops and cuts into kind of what it's going to be, and then it's nice to go up after that first practice day and do another track walk and have a bit more of an in-depth look at it then.
Okay, so talking of a track cutting in, you this weekend and the rest of the riders would have seen the track in its sort of relatively dry condition, and then to arrive on race day. What would the processes be for the riders to know probably what's about to happen and to see the track evolving throughout the session? Do they have a completely random approach to it, or is there something that's quite methodical about it? Do they think, right, with an engineer or the mechanic, right now we need to adjust the bike and make it softer, we need it to adjust for those conditions?
Yeah, well, in a race like this, we kind of knew that there was weather coming this weekend, and I noticed quite a few riders, myself included, kind of riding with that in mind.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest day was Friday, and there was no chance of weather that day, so it wasn't so important for me. I thought if I get to Saturday, I'll deal with it then, but it'll kind of just be, I'd be excited to be in the top 30, so it wouldn't matter so much. The guys that are going for the win and going for points, they would have been paying a lot of attention to the weather and kind of considering line choice and bike setup throughout the week.
125 hours or around once a year. That's the recommended service interval for a Fox 38 like this one. Or if, like me, you're planning on spending some of the summer in the Port du Soleil, then it could be a whole lot sooner. So to keep your Fox or Marzocchi suspension running silky smooth this year, then check out the Silverfish Service Centre. They only use genuine Fox parts when servicing, ensuring that your Fox warranty remains intact. Season 2 of the EMCB podcast is proudly supported by Silverfish, providing me with all the kit I need to survive a season here in the French Alps. Silverfish are also celebrating their 25th anniversary this year, supplying the UK with some of my favourite brands from the likes of Fox, Marzocchi, 100%, PTs, Michelin, Cushcore, and many more. Right, that's the end of the commercial break. Let's get back to the pod.
So when you're at the top and you're warming up and your run is coming up, would you have the live feed on your phone or something like that? And then would you be talking to your engineer, your mechanic at the time and saying like, what do you think? What should we be doing here?
Yeah, you're trying to absorb as much information as you can, basically.
Yeah.
Watching the video is really important. Those last 10 guys, they had an opportunity to watch Greg and the guys outside the top 10's runs, kind of see where the mistakes are happening and where things are changing. You could see throughout the final that early on in the final, there was some kind of wet lines that were working really well, but after 5 or 10 guys had hit that line, then that line was no good. So then the last 10 guys kind of went back to other lines that people were crashing on early in the final, but that turned into the better option. So as much information as you can get, really. And we've got like your friends or teammates that have ridden, and if you can get a text message from one of your friends or especially one of your teammates that's gone a little earlier, that helps a lot.
Okay.
These days, there's so much footage and so much communication out there that you just got to make the most of that and be as prepared as best as you can.
That final steep section just before it got into the straight, everybody going into there was finding it tricky, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, that was slippery when it was bone dry in the heat. So
is it clay? Is that why?
Yeah, it's super polished. Yeah, it feels like clay, and there's just not much you can do about it.
It's hard enough to walk on that section of hill. Like we walked up there yesterday just to watch a bit of the qualifying, and it's insane.
Well, it's a lot harder to walk. Yeah, I'd much rather go down there on a bike, to be honest. So you just got to look ahead for that sort of thing. And a run like that, like you saw Greg lay down a really good run in pretty similar conditions to everyone. And he didn't do anything special. He just rode down and stayed straight and kept the bike moving forward and kind of really looked ahead well and took lines that you probably wouldn't have considered necessarily throughout the week, but that worked out really well. And some of the guys you could see planned on those same lines and other guys that fell in there accidentally and it worked out. But a lot of guys tried lines that they thought would work and just ended up spinning out of control.
So, and Andreas came down, I think, and stayed on his bike and went on the hot seat, and his run was incredible. And it was later, obviously he was one of the last runners down. Would there have been a slight rut line sort of forming, and do you think that would have helped him, or is it literally just pure skill?
I mean, that was a very skillful run. That would be the first comment. What impressed me the most with Andreas's run is the intensity that he rode. Like you saw Greg ride a really controlled, smart run. Loic did the same sort of thing. Andreas rode at quite a high intensity and still like executed well, and just his commitment kind of helped him in a lot of those spots where others were crashing, because he committed to the entry of every line and like really set up well, and he was patient where he needed to be and let it off where he needed to. So that was very impressive. And he looked as safe as anybody looked out there. I'd say him and
Emery,
obviously, they really looked great.
Yeah. I mean, what a run! I mean, it's always good to see the Frenchies winning in Le Chais. So.
Yeah, it makes for a great show,
doesn't it? Just
it's nice as a non-French to think a non-French will win, but it's great for the sport. It's great, like the French riders in the circuit now, just all really fun, good guys that do a great job, and they're super professional. So it's nice to see them get rewarded for the work that they're doing.
Absolutely. What a race. Let's now move over to you and your racing. So how has the season been going so far? And can you just explain the series is that you like to race in or that you've chosen to race in? Because it's most people, they go, right, that's my series, I'm going to race there. But you seem to be a little bit more shotgun approach and spread yourself quite thinly.
Yeah, I mean, right now my focus is the e-bike Enduro World Series, which is kind of just fell into place. I wasn't considering racing e-bikes at all.
Right.
When I decided to call it quits on racing downhill World Cups full time. I wanted to stay in the industry in some way. I didn't really know what, just my wife and I knew that it was time for a change. Downhill World Cup is my main passion. I just love it. I'm really thankful for the career that I was able to have, and it's nice to be able to still dabble a little bit and do a little bit of development on the bike and stuff like that. But and then I've been excited about e-bikes ever since they came out. I think it's a really good addition to our sport, and it gives people like me something really fun to learn and play on, and it's kind of breaks away a few barriers to entry for a few people as well. And you're seeing a lot more variety of people getting into mountain biking now, and e-bike is a part of that. So
I mean, we've had some of the older riders like Fabian who have really pioneered the e-bike racing. And how do you find that it is as a series for obviously the huge age gaps that you've got in people racing? Like, does it make it a more open series?
Yeah, it's super interesting. The field is like, we've got trials moto guys, and I mean, Marco Melandri was racing.
No way.
He's a MotoGP guy.
I didn't know that.
So we've got like riders from all different, like downhillers like myself and Fabian, and just people who love riding bikes really. And it's been really interesting. The race format is super fun and challenging. You've got a lot of downhilling like the regular enduro, but then they add in the power stages, which add a whole nother technical element to bike setup and bike tuning and all that sort of thing.
How's your trials riding?
It's improving.
Yeah.
And even that, the power stages are that's not a consistent format at this stage. They're still quite experimental, and that's a fun time to be a part of that series for that reason. The regulations are quite open. They've tried to keep it quite open to not kind of limit development too much, and just trying to work out what format works, what the crowd likes to see. And
do you find that the power stage really helps with the series in terms of creating more of a spectacle of the race? Because a lot of the criticism of the Enduro World Series has been the fact that as soon as the riders are gone, you don't really see them for the rest of the day. So if you've got that focal point, does that help the series?
Yeah, I think it does help when they do it well. If there's a good power stage kind of close to where all the people are, then that's like last weekend we had a great crowd in the power stage, in the second power stage.
Where was that?
Combloux, just kind of around the corner from Leger here.
Sure.
And when it's got interesting stuff in there and kind of weird moves and a bit of up and down as well, that's super interesting. And you got a crowd there cheering and heckling and all that stuff. So you make a mistake and you're stuck on a hill that you can't even walk up, and everyone's yelling at you to hurry up. It's it's a really fun atmosphere. And I think it has a lot of potential to kind of make those really fun to watch and put them in the places where the people are. And that's going to add a good element to it.
Like a race like we've had today on the downhill being almost impossible to get down, have you had any uphill power stages that have been virtually impossible to get up because of the conditions?
We've been lucky enough not to quite be in that situation just yet. I think the year before I raced, there was a couple of those. There was a couple of really muddy races, and the stages were not really built with mud in mind. I know last week we had some bad weather on our race day, and they kind of built the power stage accordingly. And also the bike development's come so far. When when I started at the beginning of 22, conditions like that, like we would have just got stuck.
Yeah.
But
just spinning
now,
out.
like being able to learn about all those things and kind of progress the bike and kind of make adjustments that help you to get through those conditions has been really helpful.
We'll get onto the Shimano program shortly. How comes you've adjusted so well to enduro racing? Because it really does seem to have become your thing.
I mean, I just like riding my bike. I started racing BMX and I ride a bit of Enduro Moto for training.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Colorado for a long time and it was quite difficult for me to access downhill tracks. And it was a long way from where I lived. And then when I had time at home, it was always winter anyway. So
Yeah.
and the Enduro Moto that I had access to there, that were really good trails that stayed dry through the winter. And so I kind of got into that and that kind of translates really well to the enduro racing.
Okay.
There's a lot of the downhill skill set that helps with enduro as well. It is still the majority of it is downhilling, even though the intensity changes, and it was hard for me to adjust to kind of like feeling like I'm just kind of cruising all day. But you never really get that racing feeling, like a World Cup downhill. And then vice versa, when I go back to downhill, like I raced in Fort William and my qualifying run was slower than my time training run, and I didn't make any mistakes. I just rode too slow. Didn't kind of, I rode at enduro intensity instead of downhill intensity, and got to the bottom and I was like, I mean, even coming out of every section, I was like, I could have hit that a bit quicker,
If you had to measure the intensity that you ride at on average in an enduro, what would you say as a percentage maybe in comparison to how you'd ride 100% full gas in a downhill?
Yeah, I mean, on the downhill, you're kind of dancing around 99 to 101. 101 is like you're in the fence, and 99 you're like off the back. So it's you're kind of just pushing the limit. And in enduro, it's probably more like 90%, something like that, which doesn't sound like a lot of difference, but a 10% in intensity is like, that's like just kind of cruising all day versus really sprinting and racing. And
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, age 40, it's incredible to see that racing at that level is still a possibility. And I mean, I'm sure that's an awful lot of that is down to your commitment to it and how much you train for it. But do you find there's some elements of your riding that are now starting to drop off because of your age? And are there other areas which are actually improving because of experience, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the experience helps a lot. There's a lot of things that I used to stress about or try too hard or like things like that. And you kind of make more mistakes when you're younger. And now I have a lot more like self-confidence and things like that. And you kind of just like the enduros, I actually don't feel like, I mean, I know I'm not the fittest guy in the field, but at each race my results kind of improve in the second loop. So
Sure.
I get better results towards the end of the day, and I kind of like generally sit around 10th in the overall, and then then it's kind of like 9th, 8th, 7th, and
Is
then
that right?
like kind of like get closer to the front as the day goes on. So I think that a lot of that comes down to the experience and being able to just kind of keep consistent all throughout the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
The aging, I do feel like I'm not taking risks like I would when I was younger.
Sure.
And that probably holds me back a little bit because it's not that you want to be at a dangerous level of risk, but just having the confidence to be able to just kind of let the brakes off a little bit every now and then, which quite often helps you get through a section safer than if you're doing it a little bit slower. But that's where the age kind of comes in. And it's also like when I was 20, winning was everything. And now it's like, I know that I'll get good results from time to time, and you just kind of stick to the process. So
when I see some of the stages in places like Finale, for example, which is it's just jagged rock everywhere and slippy as hell, even in the dry. And when you're riding stuff like that, is that where the consequence element perhaps starts to creep in a little bit when you're like, I need to think about this section?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
I think about like kind of probably the section you're thinking about in finale, and I actually felt quite confident in that section.
Okay.
So I kind of, in practice I got there and there was people standing around watching, trying to figure it out, and I kind of like got there and spotted a line, and it was completely different to what everyone else was riding,
No
which
way.
made me think, am I doing the right thing? And rolled through and got a big cheer, and I was like, oh, that was good.
Yeah, fair play.
But yeah, I'm not sure. I think sometimes a section like that, it's not necessarily the consequence, but if I feel confident on the line or not, if it's something where I feel a little bit unstable, then I'm likely to just go the safe option. And
Sure.
if I spot a line like that and I'm confident I can ride it, I don't really think about it.
So let's talk about the bikes. You're racing for Yeti. Tell me about the bike that you're racing in the Enduro World Series. That's the 160E, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's an amazing bike, actually. Right from the start, they did a really good job. They worked really hard on, like, as is Yeti pedigree, they wanted to build a race bike, and they did a really good job. And having the opportunity to develop with Shimano now with the drive unit and the drivetrain that's been super fun.
Sure. Yeah, I've got plenty of questions about Shimano, some of which you may not be able to answer. But before I get onto that, actually, how easy is it for you to transition between riding the e-bike or racing the e-bike and then racing like the downhill bike, for example?
Yeah, I don't find the transition too hard. Our downhill bike and our e-bike have the same suspension platform, and so that helps. It kind of behaves in a similar way, and bike setup is it's not too foreign. The biggest thing is just I would do maybe 1,000 runs in an off season on the downhill bike when I was focused on World Cups, and now the only runs I've done are pretty much at races, and I don't do many of those. So when I get on the downhill bike, I don't feel as natural on it as I'd like to, as if I was focused on racing that. But the transition's not too hard. They're both really great bikes. It's a great platform, and it's quite easy to just get on and feel reasonably confident.
Do you try and set the downhill bike up a little bit more like the enduro bike? Are you like maybe not running the bars so high, things like that?
I mean, it's not really. I don't really. I kind of learn off both of them, but that's just a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Like tire pressures are way lower on enduro, and suspension is way more comfortable.
Yeah, okay.
Get on the downhill bike, it's like, man, this thing's rattling me to pieces.
Is that right?
But once you get up to race speed, then you kind of want it. Sometimes you want it to be a bit stiffer. So the setup is quite a bit different, just mainly for that intensity.
Sure.
World Cup downhill racing is so high speed and big holes and big hits, and sometimes it's like if you slow down for one of those big hits, it's just because you're uncomfortable. It's not because you can't ride it at that speed, So,
right, Shimano EP801. Now we've just recently had an update, a firmware update, and that's finally given people that own those motors a Overrun. Now that Overrun is something that people have been asking for a long, long time, and now it's here. I understand you guys on the race series have been running a motor that has had an Overrun feature on it. How much have you been involved with the development of that system, and how much of what you are riding now translates into what people will be updating their motors to?
Yeah, it's actually, that new update is quite close to what we run, really. We're obviously always working and kind of trying to refine and try new ideas, but that Overrun is one of my first requests.
Yeah, I bet.
And that's just super helpful. You're trying to get over an obstacle, and on the regular bike when you're climbing, it's not such a dramatic change from when you're pedaling to not pedaling. You kind of just hop over a log or something like that, and it's not such a drastic change. But on the e-bike, you're going from quite a lot more power than you would normally be putting into nothing, and it's like suddenly you just fall backwards. Yeah. You're on a steeper hill and things like that. So that Overrun is super helpful. You can just helps you to, doesn't really push you forward. It just gives you support so you don't fall back.
Sure. Now, the Shimano system is something which has been, how can I say it politely? People haven't seen it as in high regard as some of the other systems available over the last handful of years. Do you think with these new updates, people are going to start to see the benefits of the Shimano? Because I must admit, I really like the natural feel of a Shimano motor. Like it feels like an extension to your legs. Whereas some of the other manufacturers, their motors feel a little bit more like switch on, switch off. When we think about maybe a year or two into the future, do you see Shimano taking the lead when it comes to, in comparison with the competition?
Yeah, well, right from the beginning, Shimano developed the bike to feel as natural as possible. That was one of their main goals, and I think they really did a really good job of that.
Yeah.
Some of the things that it lacked, even with that goal, was like the overrun. That's a big thing that actually helps it to feel a little bit more natural. They weren't thinking about racing at all at that point.
Okay.
Obviously, it's been in development for a long time, and racing's quite new. And you just never know where racing's going to go. It's like kind of changes quickly. Downhill and XC kind of stays pretty consistent, and everything else is new ideas kind of thing. So it's hard to plan for that.
Yeah.
And Shimano is quite conservative in their development, but you know when it comes out, it's going to be very reliable and really well thought through.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing now. The reliability of our motor is really good, which is huge, obviously, from a racing perspective, but also if you want to buy a bike, and e-bikes aren't cheap, as we all know. So, you want a good, reliable product, and you want to be able to ride it. So
I personally have experienced a step up from, say, the old E8000 motors to the EP8s, which is what I've been using for quite a long time. I would hope that reliability can keep improving, because like you say, people are splashing a lot of money on these very expensive bikes, and then for them to find their bike out of warranty in 2 years time, and then suddenly the concern of a motor packing up, like it's quite it's an issue for the industry. Like it's not obviously not exclusive to any manufacturer. Do you think that we're going to see, the one thing that would be nice to see would be like an extended warranty program where you can have the confidence to either buy a bike secondhand. I don't know if that's ever going to be an option, to have a warranty on that, or to own the bike beyond that 2-year warranty. So it's a tricky sort of area, that, don't you think?
yeah, and that's a tricky area for any kind of manufacturing industry, anything you buy. And we live in a world where things deteriorate. So
Yeah.
But the good thing with our program as well is we're really pushing the motors hard, and Ryan and I especially make a point to try and break it. And we're riding in horrible conditions and getting the motors super hot and all those things that kind of bring out faults more often than maybe the average consumer.
Yeah.
And then that gives us the opportunity to kind of refine and work on those things and make those improvements, and the durability and reliability will come out of that.
Yeah.
And on the warranty side, I'm not sure. That's kind of outside of my wheelhouse, but they probably just kind of go along with what the whole industry's doing.
Yeah.
Something that I see that's super encouraging is Shimano aren't just isolating themselves, and Bosch aren't just isolating themselves. Like I see a lot of communication between the manufacturers. Not just those two guys, but and that's only going to help everybody.
Oh right, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I get asked about motor doping quite a lot.
Yeah, of course.
That's a kind of a question that comes up, and I'm really confident that everybody's playing fair and everybody's communicating really well. They're companies that are passionate about what they do and passionate about the industry, and everybody's trying to get an edge, obviously, but they also want the best for the industry. So from what I see, I'm really encouraged by that.
Off the top of your head, can you think of what the restrictions are on motor manufacturers in racing? What are they limited to in terms of power output and also like overrun distance, things like that?
Yeah, the overrun distance is 2 meters, or maybe 2.5 seconds.
Okay.
Kind of whichever comes first. So it's never going to go over either of those two.
Yep.
the top speed. The top speed is the biggest thing within racing. That's limited at 25, just like the government regulations. Most of the limitations are based on that.
Okay.
The max peak watts is 750, that's set by the government. There's maybe Austria's set at 700. So, the power is limited. They're not going to produce something that is going to breach that,
And then torque?
Yeah.
Is that limited?
I'm not sure. I've never heard a limitation on torque.
Okay.
As far as regulations go, but that doesn't mean it's not there, but
yeah. How much can you talk about how similar your motor would be to something that someone would buy off the shelf?
Our motor hardware is the same.
Okay.
So what you're buying, the EP801 that's exactly what we're running. And what we play with is the firmware. And that the firmware that's just been released to the public is quite up to date, actually.
Okay.
We're always playing with things, but that's pretty close to what we're on.
So how far have you pushed the extremes of what a motor can actually do? Have you tested them to like ridiculous amounts of overrun, for example?
We're like I said, Shimano's quite conservative.
Okay.
So we're within the regulations. We're not up against the edge of it.
Yeah.
And that just allows for margin of error. We don't ever want to be questioned on that.
What about outside of racing though? Like literally just, let's see what this thing can actually do.
Yeah, no, we haven't tested anything.
You got to want to know
that. Yeah. I mean, as a bike rider, I would love to try all sorts of different things, but honestly, the extra overrun, like we have enough overrun.
Yeah.
And that's why in the, like what's just been released is there's 3 different options, and you can, like, the highest option might be too much for you.
Sure.
There is a point where there's too much overrun and it's just uncomfortable and reduces your ride quality, really. So
in the race series, is the Shimano now the system to beat, would you say?
I'm quite confident we're at least on par.
Okay.
I don't have any motor envy. So can't say that was true when I first started, but I also knew where we were at.
Yep.
And I'm also the biggest guy. So it was, quite funny. I had quite a funny meeting with Shimano at the beginning when we first started even considering the idea of joining the program. And I was like, I'm the heaviest guy and you've got the slowest motor. Like,
yeah.
As long as we're clear, then let's see what we can do. And
how long did you have to work with them before you started to get exactly what you were looking for?
It's actually happened quite quickly.
Okay.
The first race, there was we got the new 801, so the power was there, and then it was just firmware updates, and we quite quickly ran into issues where there was limitations and kind of very conservative on battery protection and things like that. We've been able to, like I said before, just kind of push things to their limit, and if we don't have any issues, then they clear us to race with it, and so on. So we've got 1 or 2 engineers at every race, and they're just always listening to our conversations and asking good questions and kind of watching what happens. And
how often does the overheating of the motor start to cause problems? Because I know a lot of systems, they start to throttle the power output once they start to get too hot. I know a lot of manufacturers, they've taken to really very sleekly sort of incorporating the motor into the lower part of the frame. Is overheating a problem?
Not for us.
Okay.
At home, and like on a summer's day when it's like registers as 35 degrees, which means it's like 50 degrees in the sun, and sometimes I'll notice a little bit of loss of power at the top of this. I've got a nice long steep climb at home that I use to try and melt the motor. But it's negligible difference, and within like a couple of minutes at the top, then the temperature's back down to where it's at normal. And
amazing.
I mean, I've really got to be paying good, close attention to even notice the difference.
Yeah.
I know that that's a safety thing. Like once the motor reaches a certain temperature, then the firmware that just cuts the power, and that's the same for everybody. But at the races, I've never noticed an issue at the races, and some races we had one in France a couple of years ago that was like an extreme liaison, they called it. It was like one climb, one battery, one stage, super steep technical climb, and yeah, all of the other bikes had to stop and cool down during the climb, and mine was fine, and I'm the heaviest guy, so
Good to know.
yeah. So we're kind of in the same boat as everybody. Like heat management is a big issue.
Yeah.
The battery loves to be hot. When it's hot, the battery lasts longer, but the motor loves to be cold, and that's just electronics. But I haven't noticed any degradation of power in our races.
So let's talk about Autoshift. Now, Shimano were one of the pioneers of the Autoshift system. Is that something that you use when you are racing?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the beginning, then when it was presented to me, it was kind of like, oh, that's a cool idea, but I'll probably never race with it, you know? And even it was presented to me in that way. The engineers were like, we're working on this project. We're pretty sure it'll never be raced, but we'd just like you to help, give us feedback. And that's the beginning of 22. Now we're in 24, and I've raced every race on full auto shift in all the downhill stages.
Wow.
And the last two races I raced full, I used auto shift on all the liaisons as well. I use manual shifting on the power stages. That's that's actually, I sent a message recently to them and said, let's put a bit more effort in and see if we can at least improve it and kind of head towards being able to use it in those sorts of scenarios. I'm not kind of back to how we were 2 years ago. I was like, we'll probably never be able to use it in power stages, but you never know. So
is that because it's the system's under full load, and therefore there's a little bit more there's a lot more understanding that the computers would need to do to sort of process that information?
Yeah, all great questions that we're asking ourselves. Seeing how far we've come from 2 years ago to now, it's blown my mind. And none of us, even the engineers, thought it was necessarily possible to get to this stage. But I'm at the point now where on the downhill stages, I'm more comfortable on auto shift than I am on manual shift.
Wow. And
that's just mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only issues I've had with it in the last couple of races is in stage 2, which was the first downhill stage last week in Combloux, I forgot to switch it from my liaison mode to my downhill mode and race the downhill in my liaison mode, and that just doesn't work.
Shit. Okay.
So it was my mistake, not the auto shift mistake. But even then, the way we've got the manual override programmed, I was able to not lose any time. I just had to remember to manually shift.
Yeah, yeah.
When I get on, that's probably one of the biggest things when I get on my downhill bike is I forget to shift. And even if I'm manually shifting, I press the shifter and then wait for it to shift instead of pedaling. Yeah. It's because the Freeshift,
of course,
is just magic.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, that Freeshift part of the technology is something that I've kind of wished for maybe the last 15 years.
Yeah.
I know when the Honda team, I wasn't on the Honda downhill team, but that was the one thing on that bike that I was really jealous of, was you could shift whenever you wanted and you didn't have to pedal to complete a shift. And in a technical section or a tight section, I'm someone who's really particular with gear shifts. When I'm downhill racing, I have a shift sequence dialed in my head by the end of practice, and even to the point of the gear I start out of the gate in depends on my shift sequence for the whole run. It's not actually to do with the start. So, yeah, it's pretty cool to have that all taken care of. So when I go back to riding the regular bike and I'm just forgotten about shifting altogether these days. And yeah.
How intrigued are you by these MGU systems that are starting to surface, and they are becoming more and more prevalent with a lot of bike brands?
I'm not sure what the MGU.
Motor gearbox unit. So everything is housed within the motor, and many of them are belt driven.
Yeah. I mean, that's the dream. To have a gearbox on a bike is a dream. I have a real love-hate relationship with derailleurs.
Sure, yeah.
They hang out in the way that's like a huge risk. It's probably one of the biggest things that you have to pay attention to, and as far as trying to complete a race without a mechanical, especially in an enduro where you don't really know the track, so you can't really like adjust your line as much to protect the derailleur, and so to have nothing out the back there, and then also the added advantage of reducing weight on the swing arm, or not even necessarily reducing it, but being able to choose where you have the weight is that's the dream. So the issue with gearboxes all along has just been the added drag. The roller chain and derailleur system has zero drag, and it's pretty hard to match that efficiency with a gearbox. But that is something that now with electric drive units for e-bikes, then that opens up some more possibilities.
Talking of drag, how much can we talk about bearings?
I think we can talk about bearings.
So do you use stock?
I might not be able to answer. I might not know the answer.
Do you use completely stock bearings in your bikes?
Yeah, at the moment we have been.
Okay. The reason I ask that is because as we talk about the derailleur and things like the pulley wheels on them, there must be an awful lot of areas in the system that can create drag, and then you lose some wattage along the way. Previous conversation I've just had with Ceramic Speed, they seem to be of the opinion that they really can make a significant difference when it comes to the bike performance. So is that something that perhaps Shimano might be looking at internally, or is that something that you as a race team are looking to optimize in various ways?
Yeah, the bearing, I'm going to be a little bit vague because I'm not sure what the conversation is with those guys.
Okay.
But talking about bearings generally, that's obviously that's the main source of drag in a bike. There's none from the chain, which is just the current chain derailleur system is pretty amazing.
Okay.
Just be nice to be able to have something that's a bit more secure.
Yeah, of course.
Less maintenance and all that sort of thing. But bearings are interesting because I've seen over the course of my career lots of promises made by bearing companies. Most of the drag comes from seals, essentially. And I know back when I was racing BMX and I raced a little bit of track, quite often you just run no seals, and even sometimes dry bearings with no seals, and it's like zero drag, but they don't last very long.
Yeah.
Obviously with downhill you can play a little bit more with exposing bearings because they're short runs, but on an enduro day you have to have the bike have the best average for the day.
Yeah, sure.
It might be great for the first two stages, but then it's full of mud or whatever, and so bearings is a super interesting piece of the bike to be able to work on.
I'll come back to the race series. So the Enduro World Series has received quite a lot of criticism, quite a lot of flack in recent times, partly from riders and also partly from people watching, fans of the series. Many feel that it doesn't get quite the exposure that it needs to, and also I think some brands are not seeing the value in the series anymore. So from a manufacturer's point of view, where is the attraction to enter the race series?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and answering from a personal perspective, if you compare it to motocross or the motocross industry, Supercross is a spectacle.
Yeah.
It's huge. Everyone knows what Supercross is. Enduro, you've got to be a moto enthusiast to really be into enduro, and I'm into it, and I still only know like 2 of the guys, you know, so
Okay.
it's a different thing. Like you go out, as you mentioned before, you leave the pits, go and ride for 8 hours and come back to the pits, and it's really difficult to know what's going on. Even to the point of the power stages being good to watch. Like last week, the first power stage was at the top of the lift, and it was like sideways rain, and it was like, would have been beautiful on a beautiful day, but there was just nobody there.
Yeah.
And the riders that were there were trying to hide behind things out of the wind. And so it's just a challenge. When Enduro blew up, when like 10 or 15 years ago, I was encouraged by a few people to consider it. Sponsors were paying a lot of money to go to Enduro and all that, and it was really like an exciting new thing back then. Downhill has never been supported by bike sales specifically. Like companies don't become huge by selling downhill bikes, but it's exciting to watch, and the way that the riders get faster and faster into the same arena, and everyone's getting excited and having a good time. Like it's kind of hard to reproduce that in an enduro format.
Yeah.
What I saw was enduro supported by bike sales. Not everybody, the majority of people that are going to go and buy a mountain bike will buy an enduro bike.
Sure.
Something in that range, you know. You can do a few downhill runs if you want. You can go for a cross-country ride if you want. You can kind of do everything sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not everyone can have 3 $10,000 bikes sitting in the shed and still feed the kids, you know. So, and I think that's where the e-bike thing is coming in now. Is e-bike sales are blowing up.
Yeah.
Not just mountain bikes, but across the board, and that's why manufacturers are putting effort into it. And obviously, the racing validates it. The racing also gives us an opportunity to really push everything to the limit, which fast forwards development. It finds all those like reliability issues and things that otherwise consumers have to deal with. So there's coverage for it. I just don't know. For sure, you can always do a better job. No matter what you're doing, you can always do a better job.
Yeah.
I know the guys that are running the Enduro series now are really passionate about the industry. The people that I've known for a really long time, and they're still there because they love mountain biking. They don't want to do a bad job. They're investing a lot of time and resources into it. They don't want it to fail. So I've been trying to reach out a little bit and kind of maybe be a rider that wants to have a neutral conversation and help the situation instead of just throwing mud at them and kind of complaining all the time.
Yeah.
And I know from a rider's perspective, you put a lot of effort into it. You kind of dedicate your whole life to it. And when you get there and the coverage isn't as good as it could be, and the races aren't formatted as good as they could be, and things go wrong. It's like, it is frustrating, and I understand that, but
in your opinion, what could be done to improve the series?
Better communication between everyone, I think, is a big thing. Knowing better communication from the organisers to the riders, and from the riders to the organisers.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's as good as it could be from either direction. And if we could all just work together as a team and like trust that the guys that are running the series, they want it to work, and the riders want it to work. So let's, like, how do we make this better, you know?
One big WhatsApp group. Surely that'll help. No?
Yeah, or another WhatsApp group.
Or one big piss up. That might be the answer.
Yeah, that could be the answer.
That usually fixes all problems, no?
Yeah. I mean, you're not far wrong. Like, if we could just all like get together and get to know each other. It's hard at the races because everyone's so focused.
Yeah.
The organisers are buried. They work such long hours, and we think we have a hard day when we have a hard race. Like, we're out there for the race and then go home and have a hot shower, and those guys are like setting up the course for the week before and then tearing it down straight away, and then they got to get to the next venue. So
God, it's hard.
there's a lot of people that put a lot of hours in every role in our industry. So being able to have a bit of fun together would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I think just if everybody just puts a bit of faith in each other, and like the riders want it to be good, the people that own Warner Brothers Discovery, they want a return on investment as well. So if we can all just kind of work as a team and present it a little bit better and improve things. And
I know from just literally being on the hillside today and watching the downhill that the very fact that I didn't have access to the app or at least to the coverage made life quite difficult just for watching it whilst I was up on the hillside. And so we very quickly gravitated down to where the big screen was just so we could watch it. Maybe that's just because I'm not willing to. Actually, I am willing to pay for it because I do have access to through Discovery, but only when I'm in the UK. So whilst I'm here, I can't actually watch the series, and that to me is a really big fault. I mean, I'm in quite a unique situation because I'm living in a different country. It is a shame, though. I feel like that it's behind a paywall, and I mean, business is business. But the way these things used to be, we could just go on Freecaster as an example. Yeah, it is a shame that the sport that is already quite a niche sport doesn't have that exposure for those that perhaps can't afford it.
Yeah, and I mean, for sure, there's people that's a challenge. Like, especially at the moment, things are tight for a lot of people, and but even aside from being behind a paywall, it's like you can't even watch it in Australia.
Is that right?
Legally.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is obviously tough for us. It's there's ways to get around that, but
shouldn't be that way though.
Yeah, and there's one thing for there not to be like a good job done of the coverage itself.
Yeah.
But when it's really difficult to access and the app doesn't work properly, or the website doesn't work properly, or the live timing's glitchy, like all of those things, I think if you are trying to grow the product, it seems like, and I don't know why those things are the case. Like, there's a lot of regulations and negotiations on rights in every country, and I know that's super complicated. But that is a place that could use a lot of improvement.
For a sponsor like Michelin, for example, who've probably thrown an awful lot of money at all of these series, it's quite a shame that they don't get the exposure that they might want. But then I guess they know what they've signed up to. So
yeah, I mean, they know what they've signed up to, but they also like when I sign a contract, like the team knows who they signed up, but there's still expectations there. So, and to look at it from a positive perspective, I'm sure that those guys want the coverage to be out there. They want people to view it, and there might be and that's back to the communication thing. Like, I don't know the answer to that. Like, I don't know why the coverage is the way it is. I don't know why those challenges are in place. It could be an executive in Warner Brothers Discovery that doesn't quite understand or is applying rules to mountain biking that they use on soccer or whatever it is, So, and I've kind of expected all that to be the case, at least for the first couple of years.
Okay. Yeah.
When Red Bull was doing it, it's like really in their wheelhouse. It's just adding another sport that is exactly what they specialize in. So, I felt like they were doing quite a good job of it. But I think Warner Brothers Discovery has huge potential for all of us, and for Warner Brothers Discovery themselves. I see a lot of positives in our sport. There's so many more people, like general public, that are into mountain biking now, and with all the bike parks that are being built all over the world in obscure places, and it's like that's all super encouraging, and there's a foundation there for quite a large fan base. And I think as they learn over these first couple of years, hopefully they're able to correct those things and get the coverage out to as many people as possible.
The other thing that's changed slightly in recent years is the format, particularly of the E-EDR. And I know Rob Williams said to me that the series used to be a real grueling day out, and the liaisons were really quite tight, and so you'd have to beast yourself up every hill. Doesn't seem like that's so much the case now. Is that true?
Yeah, it depends on the weekend.
Okay, yeah.
Last week was quite tough, and it's also depends on the venue. It depends on a lot of things. One thing that has made it an easier day is the first year I did it, we were allowed 3 batteries and they had 3 loops, and now it's 2 batteries and 2 loops. So we averaged 3,500 meters of climbing before, and now it's more like 2,700. So it's a little bit less. The liaisons, sometimes they're tight, sometimes they're not. Kind of depends on the scheduling of the day at the venue, and yeah.
What's the battery change situation like with the Yeti?
That's quite good with the Yeti.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like a 4 mil Allen key, half a turn, the battery drops out the bottom.
Some of them are motor drops, aren't they, with some of the manufacturers?
Yeah, and that's probably something that's a bit newer. They were developed a bit later than the Yeti was, and not necessarily developed with racing in mind either. So I know they they were giving an allowance in time for those manufacturers that have to drop the motor.
Yeah.
I know most of the time now, if we had to drop the motor, that means there's nothing else that can be taken care of on the bike unless you've got multiple mechanics, which then it kind of makes it tough for smaller teams. But we're pretty lucky in that sense. It takes about 5 seconds.
Nice. Lucky for your engineers and mechanics.
Yeah.
Right, let's get to quick fire questions. They're often not very quick.
Yeah, especially at 40.
I struggle enough to ask the questions, let alone answer them. Best place in the world for food?
Oh, that is a tough question. I love the French bakeries.
Okay, yeah. Very current.
Yeah, I'd say the thing I look forward to the most when I'm at home thinking about traveling is a nice hot goat cheese salad. So, yeah, I love the food in France. Italy's obviously good for food, but once you've been there a couple of weeks, it's like, I've had enough pasta and pizza.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Never have enough tiramisu, though.
That's very good, yeah. Oh, give me a good gelato.
Yeah.
And your choice of pastry in the bakery?
Or pain au chocolat.
Yeah, it's got to be.
I also love the quiche.
Yeah? Yeah. Not bad. How do you recover from jet lag? Because you travel a lot.
Yeah, I kind of always joke that I just deal with jet lag in October.
Just save it all up.
Yeah. The biggest thing is just get into a routine as quick as possible. Bit of exercise as soon as you can off the plane helps, and sunlight. Yeah. Yeah. Get sunlight in your eyes and then go to bed when it's bedtime.
Circadian rhythm. I think that's what they say.
Yeah. Yeah. Not very scientific about it, but
just open the curtains.
The biggest thing is if you get into a routine right away, and it's the last thing you want to do after a long travel day, but
sure.
Yeah, just get stuck in.
Best place to ride a bike?
I love Cairns. Yeah, I love it at home.
Sure.
We've got a lot of lot of variety there. That's kind of a lot of variety of terrain in a condensed area. Good. I really love that.
What's it like throughout the year? As in, how much does it change in terms of weather and things like that? Yeah,
well, it doesn't change too much. It's either hot and wet or hot and dry. The winters are dry and just beautiful weather, 25 degrees every day. And I love riding in the mud, in the warm. So the summers are just amazing. Nice. I can't wait for the wet season. At home, there's a lot of people that are like, oh man, I haven't ridden for months because it's raining. And I'm like, man, that's the riding season. You obviously need to choose your trails well and don't destroy the place. But it's the tropics. It's so the jungle handles water really well, and there's certainly terrain at home that we can ride in the wet weather.
And in the UK, if you're not willing to ride your bike in the wet, then you're not willing to ride it at all.
Yeah. I struggle riding it in the cold, so that'll make the UK tough.
Oh yeah. When you can't feel your fingers, that's when you know you're having a hard day. Best place to race a bike?
It's pretty hard to go past France.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the moment. I mean, always. The Leger especially has always been such a classic course, crowd, and the French riders are always quite strong, which gets everyone excited. This kind of region in particular has a lot of English as well, and they're obviously really charismatic and have a good time at an event. So that makes it a really fun place to ride.
Is it the best race in your opinion, or what's your favourite race in particular?
I mean, my favourite race would be back home in Cairns.
Okay.
Having world champs at home a couple of years ago was like, it was really special, and we had a huge crowd that was really fun, and to know most of them, and certainly all of them knew who myself and Tracy were, so that was really fun. But I also love racing in Whistler.
Yeah.
Whistler's really cool. I've like so many bikes. And that's something I love. The industry, I love mountain biking, and Squamish, Whistler, like BC has always been such a mecca for mountain biking, and so it's fun to be there.
Grippy rock.
Yeah, grippy rock, wet or dry.
Yeah. Do you see Johan Borelli's crash the other week?
Oh, made me want to vomit.
Wow.
Yeah,
Couldn't go much worse than that, could it?
Yeah, I mean, he could have missed the bridge.
Yeah.
That was a comment Richie made. Was like, at least he landed on the bridge.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, he slid unconscious into like fairly deep water as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I heard he was fine. Like, I think he was fine after that crash, but man,
His hand's in a right state though.
Landing on that bridge, something had to go wrong.
Wow.
In a small helmet too.
Indeed. One for the full face. I don't know if I want to ask you this, but least favourite race? Don't feel like you have to answer that.
No, and it's I kind of get teased by my friends because I'd have fun at all the races.
Okay. Yeah.
I honestly can't say I have a least favorite race. Early on in my career, I could probably answer that, but
Yeah.
it's really difficult as a racer to separate a course that you don't do well at from a course that I don't have fun at. And if you're not doing well, it's difficult to realize, like, well, if this wasn't a race, I'd actually be having a great time, you know? So
I get the impression your glass is always half full as opposed to half empty.
Yeah, I think so.
Your favourite season is in time of the year.
Not winter.
Yeah. Okay.
I like being warm. And I lived in Colorado for a long time. I love it in Colorado. It's beautiful. But I'd really prefer not to go through winter.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our plan for this coming winter.
Yeah.
If we can achieve that.
Growing up in Cairns is quite an extreme climate. It gets quite hot in the summer, and I think that helped me actually when I was living in Colorado, because even though it's the opposite extreme, it kind of teaches you that there's things that you can learn of ways to figure it out and how to adapt. And
yeah.
If you are in a cold climate, you just get out in it. When it starts getting hot at home, as long as the first couple of weeks I'd train like normal, and then it's uncomfortable for a couple of weeks, and then halfway through the summer I kind of forget that it's that hot. And,
I love autumn because of the colours, and like especially what in the UK it's amazing really how everything changes, the scenery changes. But one thing I don't like is the fact that sort of impending winter that's coming.
Yeah, that's true. Colorado in the fall is just stunning.
Yeah.
All the aspens turning, and that's just, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful place to be at that time of year.
Love it.
From that perspective, I'd say the autumn is probably my favorite too.
We got an answer. Quick fire question.
Yeah. Not a very quick answer.
Your biggest inspiration outside of bikes?
Oh, probably my kids, my wife, my family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really. Yeah. Those guys, the way they support me, and just, watching the kids grow and learn and mature. And it's like, my sister, Tracy, like being able to be on the team with her for 10 years was just, it's probably the best part of my career, I would say. Like, just being able to grow closer and in a high stress environment and be up close and personal when she had hard times, big injuries and challenges, and then be able to see her rise to the top after that. And
to see her come back after she broke her femur, was it? And like just what a huge injury, and then to come back, was it 7 months or something before she won an X race?
Yeah, and I mean, not just that, like she broke her femur and her collarbone in that crash, and before she came back, like in those 7 months, she broke her collarbone 2 more times. So that was, the femur was really bad, and that whole period was like, that was really tough. Tough mentally. Like a collarbone injury is like, sounds funny to say, but it's pretty minor really. But when it piles on top of just struggles that you've been having, and it causes a lot of questions and a lot of doubts, and
collarbone's the classic mountain bike injury, isn't it? That's the problem. You see it.
Called classical, not clavicle.
So so many people walking around Morzine at the moment with injuries, and we're only at the start of the season. Hasn't taken long. Does World Cup downhill racing scare you?
No, is the short answer.
Yeah. Okay.
Riding outside of my ability scares me.
Sure.
And something that's been encouraging this year is to be at the races. And when I got to Fort William and doing track walk, and people were super excited to see me there, and more often than not, they'd be like, they're pretty fast now.
Yeah.
And that's true. They are fast, but it's not like mind blowing or anything like that. I felt like if I dedicated my time to it, I could be in the mix again, and that I felt quite encouraged by that. And it really is just riding out of where I'm prepared to be. Yeah. Like this week, I rode in the dry and the speeds got quite high, and there was moments where I know that if I had been riding my downhill bike enough, then I could have just let off and kind of relaxed a bit more and carried a bit more speed. And it actually gets easier once you get up to that speed. You kind of skip through things a bit easier, and link turns up a little bit easier, and you don't fatigue as quickly and things like that. So
how do I get more confident on off camber routes, especially when they're a bit damp?
Yeah,
because they scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, take deep breaths and ride them a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's things you can do with bike setup, and if tire pressure is a big one, you kind of which at a World Cup downhill, you don't have as much freedom to play with tire pressure because you can't go too low, or you just rip the tire off the wheel. But
what pressures would you be running here?
I was running 25 in the front, 27 in the back PSI.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't run inserts in the downhill?
I had a light one in the back and none in the front.
Okay.
I run heavy inserts most of the time in the Enduro.
Yep.
And much lower tire pressure. I think I ran 18 PSI all day last week.
Whoa.
But
okay.
It was muddy and quite slow, so
I mean, we're getting there, don't worry. What was the best era for racing? And also, who did you enjoy racing against the most?
I'm not really a golden era type of guy.
Okay.
I think right now it's probably the best era. That's where the technology is, and having the backing that we have from the industry, and seeing, like, being at the downhill race this week and seeing all the engineers there working every day throughout practice, and the technology we have access to, and what we've learned about training and preparation and all that sort of stuff. But it's kind of felt like that all along, and it's easy to look back and think of the good old days, but the good old days had some challenges too. So,
well, if you were standing on the top of the podium, who would you most enjoy to have standing either side of you?
Right now, I'd say Dakota Norton. We've been good friends for a long time, and he's wrestled some demons over the last few years, and he's just riding so well at the moment. Felt a little bummed for him today. He won qualifying and semis, and the final. I mean, felt like I told him that it didn't matter what the weather was, he could still do it. But it's kind of, you never know on a day like today. But it'll be really fun. And when I was, I used to think it'd be fun to be able to race with my son. He'll be 16 this year, and it's not out of the realm of possibility.
You think he'll race?
He loves it. Yeah, he's getting into downhill now, and
amazing.
Not sure if he'll push that further or not, but yeah.
So do you see a later life, you still going around the world following the race series as your son's racing?
I mean, that'd be pretty fun.
Yeah.
Not really sure. You're not really sure what's going to happen in the future. I didn't think I'd be here at this point, so we'll see how it goes. But I really try and spend as much time with my family as I can now, and we'll see how things develop over the next few years. But yeah, don't know to answer that. I don't know the answer to that.
We've had a dreadful attempt at these quick fire questions, but last one. Who's the greatest racer of all time?
Oh, my first thought would be Greg.
Yeah,
Greg Minnaar. He doesn't have the world championship count that other guys have. He doesn't necessarily have the winning streaks of like Aaron Gwynn, guys like that, but just the way that he's adapted so well over so many years, and just his run today was incredible. He got third today, and he used all of his experience today. His run was really clever and really just, it was fast enough to get a result, and I know that he's been off the pace that he would usually like to be at lately, and had some little injuries from Fort William. So, he's incredible.
Great to see him still going, and what he's got going on with Norco at the moment looks great. So I think, I hope he continues racing longer. I know Marshy said to me, I asked him many years ago how long's Greg got left, and he said, well, when's the pension age in South Africa?
He obviously just loves it, loves the process, and he's a great racer.
What a legend. Great. Well, thank you, Mick, so much for coming on the podcast, and it's been great to talk to you about all aspects of racing, and in particular it's really interesting to get your insights on the world of electric, because not an awful lot of people do it, but I think an awful lot more people will be doing it in the future. So it's a series I think with an awful lot of potential, and it's going to be interesting to see what you do, especially with Shimano. I'm looking forward to plenty more updates from Shimano.
Yeah, I'm loving the process. Working with Yeti and Shimano has just been the dream. They support me so well and kind of just let me do the things that I like to do, and it's I'm really enjoying that, and I'm excited for what will continue to come in the future. I really trust the brands and really trust the product, and it's from the series perspective, I hope that I can be a part of making it better and making it a really enjoyable series to watch and get people excited about it.
Yeah. No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers.